Welcome to my channel World History. The sun dips low over the sleepy English countryside, casting golden shadows on ivy-covered cottages and narrow cobbled lanes. A Gothic church spire pierces the horizon like a silent sentinel watching over. The village of St. Elwick's Cross, a place where everyone knows everyone. Or so they believe. In the waning light, she arrives. Miss Marple, poised, perceptive, dressed in her signature tweed coat and hat, stands near a crumbling garden wall. Her eyes aren't just admiring the roses. She's watching, listening. There's something the wind is whispering through the ivy. Behind her lies the Vicarage garden, a tranquil Eden of color and order. The pride of Reverend Finch, roses bloom in perfect lines, and the scent of lavender drifts lazily through the air. But one corner remains oddly overgrown, tangled and forgotten, as if nature herself is guarding a secret. Then it begins. A gloved hand brushes back the soil beneath the rose bushes. Something metallic glints. A silver locket, tarnished with age, buried deep among the roots. Who hid it here, and why? Inside the vicarage, a tea table is set, delicate china cups, fresh scones, lace tablecloth. But the tranquility is broken by a dark red stain spreading across a folded napkin. It's not blood, but it hints at something darker beneath the surface. Reverend Finch, the village vicar, trembles as he unfolds a torn letter by candlelight. His scholarly brow furrows. His lips move, repeating words only he can read. Whatever it is, it's shaken him to his core. Outside, a heavy fog begins to creep through the garden, cloaking the hedges and twisting vines. Near an old stone statue, a shadow moves, watching, waiting. Miss Marple meets the local constable near the garden gate, her voice calm but firm. They speak in low tones, serious expressions carved into their faces. The vicar's distress, the locket, the letter, it doesn't add up. Not yet. On the vicar's desk lies a note. The ink is smudged, the handwriting shaky. "Forgive me," it reads, "for what must come." An antique fountain pen lies beside it, its tip still wet. Then, as thunder cracks across the sky, the storm begins. Rain lashes the vicarage windows. A single light glows in an upstairs room, and behind the ivy-streaked glass, a silhouette watches the garden. Something happened here. Something no one dares speak aloud. But Miss Marple, ever the quiet observer, has already seen too much to turn back now. And so the whispers in the garden grow louder. The storm passed, but it left more than rain in its wake. The morning after, the vicarage garden revealed something far more disturbing than the silver locket. Beneath a patch of loosened earth, a half-dug grave yawned open, crude, unfinished, with an old mud-caked shoe and rusted buckle jutting from the soil like the hand of a ghost trying to claw its way back to the surface. Something had been buried. Or someone. The village woke to whispers. The past was returning, and it wasn't coming quietly. Miss Marple, ever composed, remained still as stone. But her mind was racing. She remembered the stories, an old scandal buried beneath the vicarage ivy, long dismissed as village gossip. Now, with unearthed bones and bloodied objects surfacing like memories, it seemed the past was far from done. On the moonlight of her thoughts, an old scene played out, a flashback from decades ago. A young woman in 1920s attire stood beneath the garden arbor, her voice sharp and desperate as she argued with a tall man cloaked in shadow. The moon caught the glint of tears and then silence. That woman was never seen again. Some said she married and left, others said she drowned. But Miss Marple never believed in tidy endings, not when the heart is involved. Later that day, she examined something tucked away in a velvet-lined drawer inside the vicarage. A broken pair of spectacles. One lens cracked like a spider web, oddly familiar. Someone in the village wore glasses like these, or used to. She made a mental note. That afternoon, the village gathered on the church lawn for the annual summer fete. Children played, elders gossiped, and beneath the surface of polite smiles, tension flickered. Miss Marple scanned the crowd with trained eyes. Everyone was laughing, everyone except one. A man stood apart, his smile too forced, his eyes too calculating. She saw him. He saw her. By the stone bench near the garden path, a single glove lay, blood-stained, torn, abandoned beside a scatter of crushed flower petals. Whoever dropped it had done so in haste. All horror. Miss Marple entered the suspect's study. Under the guise of a polite visit, the air was stale with dust and secrets. Old books lined the shelves, and on the desk, a locked drawer slightly ajar. An antique revolver nestled beside it, its barrel coated in time and neglect, or perhaps recent use. She touched nothing, but she saw everything, that evening, behind the lace curtains of her cottage window. Miss Marple watched a couple arguing in hushed tones. The woman's hands trembled. The man's voice was low, menacing. Whatever they were hiding, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. At dawn, a vintage police car rumbled up the path to the vicarage. The constable moved quickly, tension hanging over the garden like morning mist. Inside the candlelit church, a lone figure knelt in prayer, hands clasped tightly, as though hoping confession could erase consequence. Back at her writing desk, Miss Marple laid out photographs, notes, fragments of truth and lies. Her expression was grave but focused. The pieces were falling into place. The shadows behind the vicarage were lengthening, and she was getting closer to what they concealed. The rain had cleared, but the garden still held its breath. Ivy clung tightly to the old stone wall, as if protecting something within. But Miss Marple, ever curious, noticed a slight shift in the vines, a pattern broken, a draft too cold. She reached out, fingers brushing leaves aside, and there it was, a hidden passage. Its entrance, swallowed in shadows and silence, led deep beneath the garden. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep it secret, but not from her, inside. Time stood still. Damp air clung to the stone, and faint footprints marked a recent journey. Not far in, half buried in the soil beside a bed of wild herbs, something glimmered. Miss Marple knelt slowly. A silver letter opener, ornate, elegant, and unmistakably stained. The weapon that silenced a secret, now exposed by the very garden it tried to deceive. Later, a suspect sat rigid in a wooden chair beneath the garden's old oak. His eyes darted, his hands restless. The constable asked questions. Calmly, formally, but the tension in the air was electric. And Miss Marple stood just beyond the hedge, arms folded, saying nothing. Her silence was louder than any accusation. Back at her cottage, the truth unfolded in ink. Under the warm glow of her desk lamp, she studied an old diary, its yellowed pages trembling with the weight of confession. She held a magnifying glass over one passage. He said no one would believe me, that if I ever told, I'd vanish like the others. It wasn't just a murder, it was a story long buried. And now, finally, someone was listening. As she prepared to return to the vicarage, a thunderstorm rolled in once more. A black cat darted across the garden path, pausing only to stare at her with knowing eyes before vanishing into the dark. Ominous, yes. But Miss Marple never believed in superstition, only in patterns. And this one was nearly complete. A light flickered in the vicarage window. Miss Marple looked up. A silhouette stood motionless behind the curtain, watching her. As she turned to leave, ghosts of guilt always watched from behind the glass. By morning, the village was buzzing. The newspaper had printed the story in bold. Murder at the Vicarage shocks village. Black and white photos of the suspects, the vicarage, and Miss Marple herself spread across the page. No longer a rumor, it was real. And it had a name. That evening, in a modest sitting room filled with hushed anticipation, Miss Marple told the story. Calm, precise, unflinching. Every gaze turned toward her, some in horror, others in heartbreak. And when she reached the final truth, the motive, the passage, the murder weapon, the room fell utterly still, but the garden, once heavy with secrets, breathed again, restored, roses trimmed, ivy cleared, the earth no longer restless. Miss Marple stood at the gate, smiled faintly, and walked away, and as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the village rooftops, the church bells began to toll, the mist rolled in. The mystery had ended, but its echo would linger long after. The petals fell,